Well, hello there. Are you an adventurer looking to make your fame and fortune? Or are you a patron here for the lively atmosphere? Either way, please have a seat with the others, for I have a grand tale for you. I suppose I should start with my favorite subject, me. My name is Dirk Darkmane, or at least that's what I tell people. I was a bounty hunter by trade. I found it to be a great job for quick coin, quick drink, and quick women. How does one acquire the skills to hunt bounties? I'll just say I was in a situation where knowing how to palm a coin, swing a sword, and swindle a few fools was necessary to survive. Speaking of which, any gold you can toss my way for the story would be greatly appreciated. How did I end up in such a perilous situation, you may ask? I'm sorry, but I cannot tell you. I always leave them wanting more. That's the rule. Free life lesson, gentlemen. As much as beer might wet your whistle, mystery will wet her seat. My dear listeners, hold your ale close and your loved one closer, lest I take them from you when you aren't looking. Let's begin the story. I worked for, contracted for a lowly group of rogues called the Undertakers. They made a camp on the first level of Undermountain, or Waterdeep, or whatever you want to call it. They are small-timers who attempt to scratch out a fortune from the few treasures there and pick and clean the adventurers who are in the area. I would take jobs from them and enjoy the amenities of their camp. They paid me. I would skim off the top, fudge the numbers. But it became apparent that I wasn't going to get rich that way. Also, their leader can be a cunning lady. More than once, she did a little number manipulation of her own, just to keep things even between us. I'm pretty sure that she was. I'm also sure that she was on to me. It's an interesting relationship. On this particular night, or day, who knows when you're underground, I was walking back from a profitable job inspecting the flask I had obtained. Seems a man crossed the Undertakers, and they wanted him dead. He had this special flask that he would not part with, and so my employer wanted me to bring it back as proof that I had killed the target. Now wait, don't turn on me, dear listeners. I'm not completely heartless. Also, let's face it, killing is a bit done to death. I didn't kill him, I just won it from him in a card game. See, I'm really a great guy. I mean, sure, I cheated, and he was drunk, and I took his lucky flask, along with all his gold, and it all ended in a bar fight. Look, the point is that he's still alive. That's something, right? Alright, fine, I'm just an okay guy. You happy? Can we move on now? As I walked back to camp, I couldn't help but think there was something strange about the flask. As I took another sip, I knew I must have refilled it at some point, but I had no recollection of doing so. Also, it was a very nice flask. I was considering just keeping it for myself. Not going back to the Undertakers and just seeking my fortune somewhere else. I was getting tired of this same dark scene. The large cavern of stone walls and stone floors, it had become tedious. Then I noticed a tent in the distance. No, not the Undertakers, but dangerously close to them. The shadows moving inside indicated several people. A party? To be camping here and be safe? They either saw through the Undertaker's laughable vampire act, or something else had happened. But what? I took care to walk easy on the stone floor. However, given the size of the room, I didn't have to worry about echoes. I moved closer to the small tent, overtaken with curiosity. Sure, I've seen other parties down here, but on this night, I can only guess I was bored. I wondered who they were, but more importantly, I wondered if they were useful. I had come to Undermountain because of a tale about a throne, a lost throne. You see, thrones mean royalty, and royalty means riches. perhaps enough to make me a king myself. However, my search for this throne was hindered by the various dangers of these caverns. Perhaps what I needed were pawns, party members. Why, of course I meant party members. What do you take me for? Now, being the mastermind that I am, I formulated an incredible plan to get their attention, which consisted of standing outside their tent and just screaming, "Hey!" It worked. Don't judge me. In response, I almost hear immediately, "What do you want?" Well, hell, would you believe I had not planned for that particular question? Out stepped a tall figure. I could see well enough to tell he was a high elf, but disheveled. Not in the handsome, rugged way like myself. He seemed nearly feral, and more importantly, had a hand on the hilt of his longsword. As he approached rather quickly, others appeared from the tent. He stepped up to me and started sniffing me, like nose to shoulder, creepy style. I started to go for my own sword, but thought better of it when the others started to approach. It only took a moment for a large human and a lady elf to be upon me. I'm pretty sure she was a wood elf, but at the moment, I was afraid to let my eyes linger for any details. Okay guys, calm down. Believe me, I will give you all the dirty details as soon as I get a good look for myself. Holding up my hands, I tell them I mean them no harm, which is true. Well, not directly. Here's another free life lesson for those of you listening. The best form of deception is honesty. It's so much easier to fool people with the truth. So I spoke. "I can tell that you are," then I glanced at the feral elf, "refined adventurers." However, I could tell that I was impressing no one. "What do you want?" the lady interrupted me. And yes, dear listeners, her voice is as smooth as you might imagine. "I trust you met the Undertakers," I questioned, to see what they know. The human leaned in so I could see him much clearer. Green eyes, black hair, very strong. "Aye, we have. Now answer the lady's question." That's right. A human with a dwarven accent, along with an elf that sniffed me. But don't worry, things are just getting started to be weird. Speaking of the high elf, he had managed to walk behind me. I could hear him shuffling. The sound of metal gliding over leather. A weapon being unsheathed, I'm sure. I had no more time. I have to play my hand right now. So again, keeping my hands up, showing that I wasn't a threat, I said that I work for them, but I am looking for, shall I say, better employment. If you wish to explore this dungeon, I would like to help. Then I hear falling liquid beating up and bursting on the stone floor. Poison being poured upon a blade. Then this human somehow growls at me with a dwarven accent. I'm just as confused as you are. I don't know how that works. No, I can't imitate it. He accuses me of all people, of being a spy, and asks why they should trust me. And I have to admit, that was a great question. I really went into this unprepared. My musings were interrupted by a gruff voice from behind me. His words, possibly the last I would hear, were, "Well, I'm done." Then he just walked by me, heading back to the tent, his hand still on the handle of his sword. The human and the wood elf started laughing loudly. The human then just turned and walked away from me as well, still belly laughing like a dwarf. The wood elf gave me a smirk and said, "It seems like Strider likes you. Welcome to the party." She then gave me a curt little hum and looked at my leg. I felt it the second I looked down. My leg was soaked, and I could feel it seeping into my boots. And then she turned away from me and started walking back towards the tent while giggling. These people think this kind of stuff is funny. And I guess they had no doubt that I would still want to party up with them. After such a vulgarity, I had no interest in hiding my disdain. I called after them, Oh well, I cannot appropriately express how ecstatic I am to have met his high standards. As I walked, my boot made a loud squelch with each step. The whole way I could only mutter to myself how I would love to see Strider die in some unimaginable way. As we walked, I called out to the lady in front of me, asking for their names. Without even looking back at me, she informed me that her name was Tally. The human was named Sigmund, a paladin. They call themselves Birds of a Feather. They stepped into their tent again without a look back. The whole time I'm wondering what kind of name for a group is Birds of a Feather. Then as I stepped through, there was a giant feathered face looking right back at me with huge black eyes. I fell back on my ass with the bird not moving at all, no reaction, though I could tell he was watching me. His head moved only enough to follow me as I stood up. I carefully stepped around him. His stillness was more than unnerving. I sat down and chatted a bit with my contingency plan, my crew. Crew is the word that I'm looking for. They were not incredible conversationalists. However, I did get to learn who they were. The mongrel is named Strider. He's a High Elf Ranger. Seems to have been raised a little too close to nature. Had a need to mark things. He was already asleep with his blade drawn and held firmly in his hand. I could only surmise that he's a very guarded person. Tally is a wood elf of the druidic arts. Very strange powers, I tell you. However, she didn't tell me much about herself. She seemed to only say enough to be friendly. This was very off-putting for a man of my considerable charm. Sigmund the Paladin. Now, at this moment, none of them trust me, but he did at least try to hide it from what I could tell. He was most willing to speak. Maybe something to do with his knight's code or moralistic honesty nonsense. He was raised by dwarves, who met an unfortunate end by goblins. This explains the dwarven accent, also his intense dislike for goblins. It comes up a lot in conversations with him. He also spoke for the bird named Crake. He doesn't say much. He was trained as a muck and studies death. It's a little hard to sleep with him around. After a moment we became silent. I realized what Sigmund was doing. He wasn't going to go to sleep until I did. If you want trust, you have to give trust. So I took a long draw from my flask, leaned back, and let sleep take me. With that, ladies and gentlemen, that ends my story for tonight. As always, be sure to let your barmaid know how much you liked the story. Also, you may want to talk to my apprentice writer. I call him a subscribe. Thank you very much for listening, and may you always thirst for ale and adventure.